for senator and governor. Look, I've been working all over America, and I want to tell you a little bit about the economic context of this election and the political context of this election, and why what you do is so important. But first, let me say, most of my life has nothing to do with politics anymore. I run a big foundation. We work all over America, and we work all over the world. And here's what I know. Wherever people treat each other right, wherever they recognize their special individuality but embrace our common humanity, wherever people have honest and open disagreements for the purpose of reaching the best decision, and they work together, good things are happening. Everywhere in the world. Wherever people spend all their time fighting and building up walls and dividing each other and running each other down, good things are not happening. This is not rocket science. The most encouraging thing about Michigan's future is, just look out here. There's a lot more young people than there would have been if we'd had this meeting 30 years ago. We have Flint's bedrock African American community. We have Hispanic Americans. We have Arab Americans. We have Asian Americans. We have, a few old gray-haired white Irish Americans. I'm glad and Ukrainians and Poles and God only knows what else. We're all here together. And there are mountains and mountains and mountains of research that show that diverse groups make the best decisions. If I could wave a magic wand and we could find the person in this room with the highest IQ and put that person behind the curtain and just baby them for 48 hours. Say, you just whatever you want to eat or drink, whatever music you want to hear, we'll make you a happy soul for 48 hours. And the rest of us stayed here and got by on crackers and Cokes. And they fed 20 questions in to the genius and 20 to us over 2 days. We'd make better decisions. That's why democracy works. But it only works if you believe in empowering every individual, if you believe everybody should have a chance, everybody should have opportunity, everybody ought to get a chance to shoulder his or her share of responsibility. That's what this is about. And that's basically what I do with my life. But every election season, I kind of feel like an old retired racehorse. And I'm off in the barn, and all of a sudden some nice-looking young person shows up with an extra bale of hay. And then they come in and brush my coat real nice. Somebody puts on the reins, puts a bit in my mouth, drags me out to the track, and then slaps me on the rear and I wonder if he can get around that track just one more time. And we're laughing. Everybody gets so mad in these elections. The Republicans and the Koch brothers, they put in so much money and they're just trying to run everybody down and stop you from thinking. And I'm happy. 26 days ago, I became a grandfather for the first time. Last Saturday night, I went home to my 50th high school reunion. I was one of my classmates recognized for only missing one of them in 50 years. Even when I was in the White House, except when we were in a military conflict over Kosovo trying to save those people. When I did stay in the White House, I went home. I've got the friends of my youth. I think friendship's pretty important. And I think if you're lucky enough to rise up any greasy pole in life, you better remember the people that liked you when you were down at the bottom of that pole. Those people would be my friends if I were working in a service station in the little town in Arkansas where I was born. So I just got back from that. I'm happy. But I'm not happy about what's going on in this campaign. And I see what's going on in Washington and all this gridlock and all this crazy stuff, and I think, I know why that happened. It happened because a different America shows up in these midterm elections and shows up in the presidential elections. Now, when we vote for president, the folks that show up to vote look pretty much like us. But the people that vote with us are more likely to have little kids, get by on modest incomes, have to go to work early, drop their kids off at child care, got more than they can say grace over, and don't understand that all the members of the House of Representatives, a third of members of the Senate, most of the governors, and the state legislators who shape the future of people just as much as the president does, they get elected at these midterm elections. So we, Democrats, have undertaken a great experiment. We need an ongoing debate, and for these out-of-state groups with unlimited amounts of money to buy all these ads. And it's true, the Koch brothers have been the biggest contributors, they and the people that they can get. And I saw where they got a guy that I know to be one of their biggest contributors, and he said he was doing it to keep his children and grandchildren from growing up in a socialist state. And I thought, hey, you're trying to kid, man. You got more money than anybody I ever saw. You're doing just fine. Nobody's trying to take your money away. You got way more money than I do, and I'm already paying way more taxes as a percentage than he is. This is crazy. It's all this feeding all this paranoia. Now, because I'm not a kid, I realize that for more than 60 years now, somebody's been trying to sell me something. And you know, when Hillary had that traveling job as Secretary of State, this is important. She was gone all the time. I was home alone watching TV. And every time you watch all those ads, they're trying to sell you something, right? And now that I'm not in the White House and I answer my own phone when it rings, you know, there's half the time there's somebody that doesn't know who the heck they call. They're just doing those calls and they're trying to sell you something. People knock on your door, they're trying to sell you something. It has been my experience that when someone who's trying to sell you something has a strategy designed to stop you from thinking, they don't have your best interest at heart. On the other hand, if somebody trusts you to disagree with them, say, this is what I'm trying to convince you to do, here's why I believe it, if you have any questions, let's have an honest discussion about it, I might go along with them even if I don't agree with them all the time, because they treat me like a human being and like I've got half good sense. That's what's going on. This is ridiculous, the amount of money that's being spent, just dumped into these states. I was last night in Kentucky, where the Republican leader, according to the two biggest newspapers in Kentucky yesterday, is in a dead tie with the Secretary of State of Kentucky, a 36-year-old young woman who has said that she thinks they deserve a better chance. And these same groups have spent $50 million in tiny Kentucky trying to badmouth this lady. Now, I was in Arkansas where my senator had no opponent 6 years ago. He was so popular and has a legendary ability to get along with Republicans as well as Democrats. They spent $20 million trying to demonize him as way to the left of anybody who's ever served in Congress in all of American history. The nicest fellow you'd ever want to know. He's a good legislator. a close friend of Hillary's, and they worked in the Senate. But he's sort of, he grew up in Arkansas. There's a lot of people here who have roots in my native state. He's used to treating everybody with respect. And I was asking Congressman Kildee what happened to all that pet Coke along the Detroit River. You know about that? The Koch brothers deposited that. That's their real gift to Michigan, the pet Coke. But they're spending so much money, what they want after this is a Congress full of Coke pets. And as bad as that pet Coke is, I'd rather have that than a Congress full of Coke pets. I'd rather have somebody from Michigan representing you. Somebody from Arkansas representing the people I grew up with that were at that high school reunion. Nicest thing that's happened to me since I've been in Michigan is I was back there taking a few pictures, and an African-American fellow came in and said, my mother went to Yeager High School, which was then in the era of segregation in the South. That was the black high school in my hometown. And she said, my mother loved your granddad because he had a grocery store in the African-American neighborhoods, and there was no food stamps, and if some working person came in with no money and kids to feed, he always gave them food on credit. That's the America I grew up in. That's the America that we ought to have again. That's America we'll never get if we stay home at midterms or get influenced by all these negative, crazy television ads. So here's the deal. Here's why it's so important to elect Gary Peters and Mark Schauer and the rest of our team. We had a terrible financial crash in 2008. Before that, after the 2000 election, we went back to trickle-down economics. Wasn't working very well before the crash, was it? Before the crash, the median income, that is the one in the middle, in America adjusted for inflation, was lower than it was before I left office, on the last day I left office. Already. Because then we had this crash. Now, it's the fourth really big crash we've had in 150 years. We had one in 1872, one in 1892, the Depression in 1932, and then 2008. They had a big one in Japan in 1990. All over the world, there have been a lot of these crashes in the last 150 years. On average, they take 10 years to get over. And when you hear people running the president down, or the people who've been in Washington, you remember this. On average, they take 10 years just to get the jobs back you lose in the crash. And think about it. When, a company like all these auto companies are in danger of going broke, and the banks are closing, everybody's scared to borrow money, everybody's scared to lend money, everybody just shuts down, it takes forever and a day to get over it. 10 years just to get back to where you were. It took America in this difficult time 6 years and 1 month. Now, here's what I want to say about this. I don't want anybody to stand up and do handstands. Look what the unemployment rate is in Flint. You can't be happy about that. But you can. What this means is we got a chance to start again. We got a chance to make a new beginning. All of you who are first-generation immigrants, we've got a chance to recreate in America the conditions that brought you here. All of you that have worked all your life, you've got a chance now to resume the search for your dreams and give your children and grandchildren the chance to achieve theirs. We're starting over again. Now, that's why these elections are so important. Because if you look beyond all the negative ads and just think about it, all those people that pay for those ads in Michigan, where are they going to be on Wednesday morning after the election? Not in Flint, that's for darn sure. They're not going to be working at the local soup kitchen. They're not going to be invested in some local business. They're not going to be doing jack. They'll be somewhere else worrying about where they are. And if they win the elections, they'll be in Washington trying to collect on their investment. And that won't help you either. We got a chance to begin again. And the choices are we going to go back to trickle-down economics? Or are we going to help working families and have middle-out economics, grow the middle class, raise incomes, and give poor people a chance to work their way into it? The saving the auto industry is part of a great story. We now have 700,000 more manufacturing jobs than we had before the crash. Why? Because as other countries get richer and as manufacturing gets more productive, labor, even very well-paid labor, is a smaller percentage of overall manufacturing costs. Materials are the lion's share. In many places, the rest is transportation and electricity. And it means we can make things again. And I don't know about you, but I think it's a good thing for America to make things. I think we ought to be making more things. So, the real choice here is on middle out, poor up economics or trickle down. It's social policy on education and health care. It says we're all in this together or you're on your own. This is not rocket science. It's real simple stuff. This minimum wage debate is the funniest thing I ever heard in my life. One thing I will give the conservatives who have taken over the Republican Party, although I don't think they're conservatives, they blow up the debt every chance they get. But the extreme right wing, I'll give it to them. They are consistent and totally impervious to evidence. Now, no, really. I raised the minimum wage when I was governor. I raised it when I was president. I tried to raise it twice when I was president. Republicans wouldn't go along with me. And now the president of Congress want to raise it again, and they always say the same thing. At least they don't have to cut a new record. It's the same old song. Oh, it'll raise the unemployment rate. Oh, it'll be terrible for small business. Well, look, if we raise the minimum wage in Michigan to $20 an hour tomorrow, it would be tough for small business. If we didn't exempt the smallest businesses, it would be tough. Nobody's talking about that. But if you raise it to $10.10 an hour, what would happen? Not only would the people who get a raise be helped, but there would be millions of your fellow Americans just above that level who'd also have their pay increased. They got all they can do to raise their children and keep body and soul together. They would go right out and spend all that money. All the merchants they spend it with would be better off. Then they would order more of whatever it was that was bought, and all those people would be better off, and we would grow the economy faster. This is not rocket science. It happens every time. If every working woman in this country, and I was raised by a working grandmother nurse and a working mother, I have a working wife and a working daughter. My grandchild's only 26 days old, so she hadn't started work yet. But look, if everybody was paid the same amount of money for the same kind of work without regard to their gender, this would be a wealthier country, not a poorer one. We would have stronger families, not weaker ones. Every working father that worries because he has to spend all of his salary and can't set aside any money to save for his kids' college would be a happier father. Yes. Who are we kidding here? This is not just about women. This is about whether we're going to go forward together. And I've heard all these lousy excuses I can stand about why we can't be for equal pay for equal work. I think your first vote was for the Lilly Ledbetter Act, and you voted for it. Then there are all these people that don't want to lower the price of college loans. Democrats want to let you refinance the interest rate the way you can refinance your interest on homes. The Democrats think everybody with a college loan ought to be able to pay it back as a small fixed percent of their income. That way you would dramatically cut the dropout rate. We also believe we need to rebuild through our community colleges and technical training institutes the capacity to train people for jobs that are actually there. We made a big mistake in America, and nobody is blameless in this, in dividing 30 or 40 years ago academic education from practical education. We need to put them back together again. There's nobody that says you can't be a world-class welder and still like reading Shakespeare. It's a big mistake. It's a big mistake to divide this. We got a chance to do all this now. Now, I don't care what they tell you about all this other stuff. That's what this election is really about. It's about jobs, incomes, education, health care, families, and communities. When you get all done with this, and this is serious, I made a joke about the old horse going around the track, but I can tell you this. When you get done with public service, you ask Carl Levin, if you don't believe me, there's only three things that matter. Are people better off when you quit than when you started? Do children have a brighter future? And are things coming together instead of being torn apart? Everything else is background music. I'm just telling you, it's background music. Nothing else matters. And so I'm going to show you one thing. You ought to vote for Gary Peters and Mark Schauer, and you ought to make sure other people do. Each person in this room, I realize I'm preaching to the saved here. But every one of you will pass at least 100 people between now and Election Day who will not vote if you don't tell them to and tell them why. Isn't that right? You know you will. Every one of you will. And keep in mind, we've got this deeply divided, conflict-ridden politics because two different Americas show up at the midterms and at the presidential elections. And it's bad for our friends in the Republican Party because it pushes them too far to the right and makes them think all they got to do is win a primary. And it makes us think we can never agree. You know, Americans, it's amazing. We've gotten over all these bigotries we have. We're not near as racist or sexist or homophobic as we used to be. We have one remaining bigotry. We just don't want to be around anybody that disagrees with us. Benjamin Franklin, who, along with Martin Luther King, are the two most important Americans who never became president, Benjamin Franklin once said, "Our adversaries are our friends, for they show us our faults." And we could all feel that way. How many times has somebody proved their true friendship to you by saying, "You're being hard-headed and you're wrong. You ought to think about this," right? How many true friends do it? You get a few in your life, right? That's the way Washington ought to work. That's the way it used to work. I remember one time the Senate Republican leader one time was on one of these Sunday talk shows, which I didn't watch and didn't participate in, but the politicians, a lot of them like him, and he got on there and said I was a spoiled brat. And I'd already been reelected president. I was in my second term. And so one of the young people that worked for me was all huffed up and called the White House and told me what he said. And so I called him on the phone. And he said, "You called to chew me out, didn't you?" I said, "I did, but not for what you think." He said, "What I mean?" I said, "What were you doing on that program?" I said, "I know what happened to you today. You worked hard all week long, and somebody on your staff talked you into doing that Sunday morning show, so you had to get up Sunday morning real early, and you had a headache. And you should have been in church, and instead you're going on this TV show, and you're mad that you agreed to do it, and you got on there, and they baited you about me, and you took the bait and cussed me out." He said, "That's exactly what happened. How did you know?" Now, and we had a better relationship till I left office. Look, we can get America back that way again. We need to get the show on the road, folks. Unemployment's too high here. We got to get a lot more jobs here. We need more American success stories like Shinola in Detroit. Right? So, I went through that factory a little while ago because they were grateful for me for hawking their watches everywhere, and I do it without commission. I'm the only free salesman they got. But I met, they have two production lines. One of the women running one of those production lines is an African-American woman who is a uniformed security guard guarding that building when it was empty. And now she is running a manufacturing production line, which are the only watches made in America with Swiss Watch Works. And the guy told me that she was a genius at it. There's people like that everywhere. Underemployed. Their talents underdeveloped, underutilized. Look, everybody's all said, I'm not trying to give you a bunch of applause lines. I'm just telling you that's what this is about. We're back to square one. We're out of the hole. We have to plan the future. You'll do better with Gary Peters. You'll do better with Mark Schauer. You'll do better with that. And you'll do better voting for them because they're for things, and you heard what they were for. Now, I want to show you something. And I'm not doing this to be self-serving. I'm doing it to prove that trickle down is not worth a flip compared to middle class out and poor folks up. The Republicans have done trickle-down economics through 5 presidential terms. It worked the best under President Reagan. Why? Because we never had run permanent deficits before. Cut taxes for upper-income people and don't worry if you can pay the bills. So the interest rates didn't explode. So let's look at their best example. Now, in this, I'm going to show you this is what it's about. Reagan's years are yellow, and the years I served are gray. So they did better, the top 20% under Reagan, by a hair. 22.5 to 20.5, more or less. And that's almost all the top 2%. Okay? But the second 20% did 25% better under our way of doing it. The people smack down in the middle, they did 50% better. The next 20%, they did more than twice as well. But look at here. The bottom 20%, that's what's wrong with this trickle-down economics. In that prosperity of the 80s, with only 50% more jobs, we had 50% more jobs. Their incomes went up less than 1%. Bottom 20% in the years you gave me to serve, 23.6%. That can happen again. The economy works better when we share. When we share the responsibilities, when we share that. Otherwise, the union movement wouldn't be wasting all their time being for the minimum wage, right? Because their members don't make the minimum wage. They know it's good for everybody. So that's why you need to be for them. Now, I realize this is not a typical rally, but, you know, you're going to vote. We don't win these races, and we get this gridlock because too many people don't vote at midterm. You will pass 100 people, every single one of you, in the next 13 days. Will you ask them to vote? Yes. Will you tell them why they should vote? Yes. Will you tell them they should vote for Gary Peters and Mark Schauer? Yes. Then you'll do great. Thank you, and God bless you.